The YVZR Dominion ruled vast swaths of the known galaxy, their power built on conquest, fear, and one unshakable belief: they were the apex predators of the cosmos. For thousands of cycles, they had proven it time and time again, dominating weaker species, enslaving their populations, and hunting the most dangerous creatures the stars had to offer. Their elite warriors, the Apex Lords, were more than just military leaders. They were legends. Masters of the hunt, they traveled from system to system, seeking new trophies to cement their status. Their collections ranged from the venomous dread beasts of Caltharan to the cybernetic war abominations of the Zenthi Rift. Nothing had ever truly challenged them. Then, a new rumor reached them, one that intrigued and amused them. A human survivor. Alone. For nearly a decade, he had lived on Corthus V, a war-scorched world abandoned after one of the bloodiest battles of the Galactic Wars. It was a graveyard, a wasteland filled with the wreckage of long-forgotten war machines, the bones of dead soldiers, and the lingering remnants of failed bioweapons. It was not a place where anything was meant to live. And yet, somehow, this human had survived. The reports were vague, unverified accounts from scavengers and desperate smugglers who had dared to land on the planet's surface, only to flee in terror. Stories of shadows that moved unnaturally, of scavengers disappearing without a trace, of traps set with deadly precision. Most of the Dominion dismissed it as myth. But the Apex Lords were different. To them, this was an opportunity. Humans were nothing special. The Dominion had conquered them easily in the war, forcing their governments into surrender. Their technology was primitive, their bodies weak. But this one had defied the odds, and that made him interesting. Varkesh, the leader of this particular hunting party, found himself intrigued but unimpressed. He had led over 100 successful hunts, tracked beasts and warriors across the most inhospitable worlds, and slain creatures that entire planetary militias had failed to contain. A single human? Hardly a challenge. Still, he respected the hunt. Varkesh stood aboard the Dominion Hunter-class warship, Bloodfang, reviewing the data on their target. The holographic display flickered, showing a blurred satellite image of a human figure moving through the ruins of Corthus V. He was fast, unnaturally so for his kind. His heat signature was faint, his movements erratic but purposeful, as if he knew how to evade detection. The file offered little else. No name. No origin. Just a single, chilling note from an unknown source. Do not pursue. He is still there for a reason. Varkesh scoffed. The hunt was already over before it had begun. He turned to his team, 11 of the finest hunters in the Dominion. Clad in advanced stealth armor, equipped with plasma rifles and adaptive vision lenses, they were the peak of hunting evolution. This human is nothing, Varkesh growled, his voice deep and guttural. We track him, we flush him out, and we bring his corpse back as proof of our superiority. The hunters thumped their fists against their chests in agreement. Varkesh turned to his second-in-command, Exortal. Deploy the drop pods. We land in 1 hour. Exortal grinned, bearing razor-sharp fangs. Let's make this quick. The descent was smooth. 12 drop pods streaked through the crimson-tinged sky of Corthus V, breaking through the dense cloud cover and landing with precision near the outskirts of a ruined city. As the pod doors hissed open, the hunters emerged into a landscape of desolation. Towering wreckage, twisted metal, and shattered buildings stretched in every direction. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rust. Pools of stagnant water reflected the eerie glow of the planet's dying sun. Varkesh activated his scanner. The human was nearby. This place reeks of death, muttered one of the hunters, Corvas. Hard to believe anything is alive here. Varkesh ignored the comment, focusing on his readings. The human's last known location was less than 2 kilometers ahead, near the ruins of an old military base. He signaled for the group to move forward, spreading out in formation. Their scanners swept through the ruins, searching for any sign of movement. The air was silent, save for the occasional gust of wind rattling through rusted structures. Then, a signal. A heat signature, faint but distinct, moving through the remains of a collapsed tower. Varkesh's lips curled into a smirk. We have him. The hunters moved with precision, encircling the structure, weapons raised. Exortal led a small squad inside, navigating the debris. Through his visor, Varkesh watched the infrared feed as Exortal's squad closed in. Then, the signal vanished. What? Exortal whispered through the comms. Where did he go? Varkesh frowned. The scanners weren't malfunctioning, something had erased the signal entirely. Then a scream. Short. Brutal. Corvas is down, one of the hunters shouted. Varkesh's blood ran cold. Corvus was one of his best. And he hadn't even fired a shot. The comms crackled. Target is mobile, repeat, target is. A sharp gasp. Silence. Another hunter gone. Varkesh spun, scanning the rooftops, the wreckage, the shadows. He saw nothing. His team? They were the hunters. But now, for the first time in his life, he realized they were the ones being hunted. The YVZR Dominion prided itself on precision. Their hunters were disciplined, methodical, and relentless. Their technology allowed them to track prey across light years. Their warriors had crushed civilizations and hunted creatures capable of devouring entire platoons. But now, here on the ruins of Corthus V, two of their best had just vanished without a trace. Varkesh stood still, gripping his plasma rifle tightly, his mind racing. His first instinct was disbelief. How? How had a lone human taken out Corvus and another elite hunter so quickly and without a single warning shot? The others were tense now, gripping their weapons as they scanned the wreckage around them. Their formation tightened instinctively, years of training kicking in. No one wanted to be the next to disappear. Exortal's voice came over the comms, hushed but urgent. No movement. No heat signatures. It's like they were never here. Varkesh clenched his jaw. That didn't make sense. The scanners should have at least detected a struggle, movement, something. Instead, it was as if the prey had simply erased them. A flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned sharply, raising his rifle. But it was just a torn banner, remnants of the long-dead war, fluttering in the wind. Varkesh exhaled, steadying himself. We keep moving. Stick to pairs, cover each other's backs. Whatever this human is, we outnumber him. We outgun him. He cannot possibly. A shriek of agony cut him off. The squad whirled as another hunter, Gorvar, staggered backward, clutching his throat. Blood spurted between his fingers. His eyes were wide with shock. No gunfire. No explosion. Just a single, precise cut across his throat. Varkesh barely had time to process it before Gorvar collapsed, lifeless. Get behind cover, he barked. The hunters scattered, taking defensive positions behind wreckage and crumbling walls. Varkesh slammed his back against a ruined support beam, his breathing controlled but faster now. His mind calculated probabilities. This human was not only armed but clearly skilled. The method of attack was surgical. No wasted movement. No sign of struggle. This was no scavenger. No desperate survivor. This was something else. Exortal's voice hissed through the comms. This isn't normal. He's hunting us. Varkesh knew it was true. They weren't tracking him. He was tracking them. The team remained silent, weapons scanning the darkness. Minutes passed. Then, a faint click. Varkesh barely had time to shout before a detonation rocked their position. A tripwire-activated mine hidden beneath rubble went off, shredding another hunter in a blast of shrapnel. The hunters scrambled for cover, scanning for the source of the attack. His setting traps, one of them growled. Varkesh's fists clenched. How long had this human been preparing? How long had he been watching them before he made his first move? This was no desperate fugitive scavenging for survival. This was a planned execution. Varkesh activated his communicator, calling for an aerial scan. The Dominion's hunter-class warship, Bloodfang, had been maintaining a high-orbit surveillance pattern, providing overwatch. Command, scan the ruins for hostiles. We need thermal imaging now. A pause. Then static. Bloodfang, respond. Silence. Exortal's eyes widened. That's not possible. The Bloodfang was one of the Dominion's finest warships. No lone human, no matter how dangerous, could possibly disrupt its communications. Could they? Then another sound. A low, deliberate scraping. A message, carved into a rusted metal beam nearby. The squad turned, reading the jagged letters illuminated by their rifle lights. You should have left me alone. A chill ran down Varkesh's spine. The words were recent. Fresh. He whirled around, scanning the darkness. The human was toying with them. And then another message, scrawled onto the side of a ruined transport vehicle. You're not the first. A realization struck him then, one he had ignored out of arrogance. This human had survived for years on Corthus V. That meant others had come before them. And they were all dead. Exortal took charge, motioning for the remaining hunters to tighten formation. We get back to the drop pods and regroup. Now. Varkesh hesitated. This wasn't how the hunt was supposed to go. He was Apex. He was the predator. And yet, every instinct in his body screamed that they were in over their heads. He forced himself to nod. Fall back. We. A sharp crack echoed through the ruins. One of the hunters, Jorthak, was thrown backward. A single bullet had punched clean through his helmet. A sniper. The realization sent a fresh wave of dread through the squad. Varkesh had fought on dozens of battlefields, but this was different. A sniper's shot wasn't just a kill, it was a message. The human was telling them that he was watching. That he could pick them off whenever he wanted. This isn't a battle, Exortal whispered. This is an execution. Varkesh's mind raced. They needed to adapt. We need to move. Now. The hunters scrambled, using smoke grenades to mask their retreat. Plasma rifles swept through the fog, but there was nothing to shoot at. They ran, slipping through alleyways of twisted wreckage, hearts pounding. Another hunter fell. This time, a knife, thrown from the shadows, lodged itself perfectly in his exposed neck joint. Varkesh didn't stop. He didn't even look back. They reached the extraction beacon, a temporary safe zone where their ship was supposed to pick them up. But it was gone. The beacon was silent. And in its place, burned into the steel plating of a ruined dropship, was a final message. The ghost of Corthus V is real. Varkesh realized the truth then. This wasn't just a human soldier. This was something far worse. Something they never should have hunted. Varkesh clenched his jaw, forcing down the rising tide of unease. The phrase burned into the steel haunted him. The ghost of Corthus V is real. He had never feared a hunt before. Never hesitated. But something about this felt wrong. This wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a game of cat and mouse. The human had planned this. And they had walked straight into it. The remaining hunters, only 7 now, stood in a tight formation, their weapons scanning every direction. Exortal, breathing heavily, checked his scanner again. Nothing. No heat signatures. No movement. Just the overwhelming, crushing silence of a battlefield long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Then, a whisper over the comms. A voice that wasn't one of theirs. Soft. Cold. Leave. The single word sent a chill through Varkesh's veins. The human was inside their communication system. Exortal swore, furiously tapping at his gauntlet controls. That's impossible. Our encryption is military grade. Varkesh exhaled slowly. He's been listening the entire time. The realization settled over the hunters like a suffocating fog. Every strategy they had discussed, every fallback point, every scan they had run, he had known it all. He wasn't reacting to them. He was directing them. And now, he had given them a warning. Leave. For the first time, Varkesh considered it. Then, a second whisper crackled through the comms. This time, it was a name. Varkesh. Varkesh froze. The human knew his name. Exortal's mandibles twitched. That's not possible. There's no way. Then another name. Exortal. A hunter swore under his breath. His inside our ship's records. Then another name. And another. One by one, the ghosts spoke each of their names. Until only silence remained. Varkesh felt something unfamiliar creep into his bones. Dread. They had to move. Now. We go dark, Varkesh ordered. No more comms. No more scanners. Everything manual. Exortal hesitated. If we shut off. If we keep them on, he knows our every step. A long silence. Then, one by one, the hunters disabled their electronic systems. Their visors darkened. Their comms went silent. Their advanced tracking tech, useless now. They were blind. Hunting by instinct alone. The way it was meant to be. Varkesh took point, leading the team through the ruins. Their exfiltration point was 2 kilometers north. If the Bloodfang was still operational, they could use a short-range signal to get a rescue team down here. If it was still there. If this human hadn't already taken it. The thought made his stomach tighten. But he pushed forward. One step at a time. The ruins felt different now. Before, they had been a battlefield, a desolate wasteland. Now, they felt alive. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of wind sounded like breathing. Varkesh's grip tightened around his rifle. His mind repeated the ghost's message. You should have left me alone. Then, ahead, a sign of movement. A figure. Crouched behind the remains of a broken vehicle. Varkesh's instincts flared. He lifted his weapon. But something felt off. The figure wasn't moving. Too still. Exortal knelt beside it, blade drawn, ready to strike. Then he hesitated. It's not him. Varkesh moved closer, his eyes narrowing. It was a body. A YVZR hunter. But not one of theirs. The armor was different. The insignia marked him as a Dominion warrior, but not from their ship. Varkesh crouched, checking the body. This warrior had been dead for years. Exortal's eyes widened. This is impossible. Varkesh's mind worked quickly. This meant one thing. They were not the first hunting party to come here. And they had never heard about it. Which meant none had ever made it back. Then, a quiet clink. Varkesh reacted instantly. Down. A grenade detonated overhead, sending a shockwave through the ruins. Smoke billowed, obscuring their vision. The hunters scattered, weapons raised. Another gunshot. Another hunter fell. Varkesh spun, firing blindly into the haze. No target. No footsteps. The human wasn't running. He wasn't retreating. He was invisible. Then, a whisper in the smoke. Not from the comms. This time, it was right beside him. Low. Amused. Too slow. Varkesh swung his blade, but nothing was there. A hunter screamed, then was silenced. More gunfire. More movement. But it was all one-sided. Varkesh had fought ambushes before, had led battles in hostile terrain. But this wasn't a battle. This was slaughter. Another message was waiting for them on a ruined wall, scrawled in what looked like blood. You didn't listen. Varkesh gritted his teeth, chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. They had to get out. Now. But as the smoke cleared, something else became horrifyingly clear. They were no longer heading toward their exfiltration point. Somewhere in the chaos, the ghost had led them away. And standing in their path now, waiting, was a single figure. The human. Dressed in scavenged armor, his rifle resting on his shoulder, his face hidden beneath an old, battered helmet. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. For the first time, he was standing in plain sight. Varkesh raised his rifle, Exortal beside him. The human lifted a hand, slowly, and pointed at them. Then, he spoke. A single phrase. One that shattered everything Varkesh had thought he knew. You know my title. Varkesh froze. His title? Not his name. Not his rank. His title. His mind spun through Dominion records, through legends, through whispers of humans who had been more than soldiers. And then he understood. His blood turned to ice. They hadn't just been hunting a human. They had been hunting a legend. And now, they were prey. Varkesh's grip on his rifle tightened. The human stood before them, relaxed, casual even, his rifle resting against his shoulder. He wasn't in a combat stance. He wasn't bracing for an attack. No, he was waiting. As if daring them to make a move. Exortal inhaled sharply beside him. What does he mean? His title? Varkesh didn't answer. His mind was already racing through possibilities. The YVZR Dominion had conquered worlds, torn empires apart, crushed rebellions before they could begin. And yet, here on this forsaken world, a single human had turned the hunters into prey. But it wasn't just any human. This was someone with a title. A name that meant something. A name that carried fear. Then the human spoke again. Calm. Measured. I was given a warning, once. The hunters tensed. Do not hunt what you do not understand. The human tilted his head slightly. You didn't listen. Varkesh swallowed hard. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Something far worse than they had ever imagined. Exortal snapped first. His plasma rifle came up, his finger tightening on the trigger. He bleeds like the rest. The human moved. Faster than he should have. Before Exortal could fire, the human twisted sideways, his rifle snapping up in a fluid motion. A single shot rang out. A clean, precise bullet punched through Exortal's visor. He hit the ground instantly. Dead before his body even registered the impact. A cold silence fell over the remaining hunters. The human exhaled slowly, adjusting his stance. I told you to leave. Varkesh's stomach twisted. The ghost wasn't just faster. He was calculating. Every kill was deliberate. Every action had been controlled. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Kill him, one of the remaining hunters roared, breaking rank. A fatal mistake. The human vanished. 1 second he was there. The next, gone. The hunter fired wildly, plasma bolts scorching the ruins. Nothing. Then, a blur of motion. The human appeared at the hunter's side, his blade flashing. A quick, brutal slice to the throat. Another hunter gone. Blood dripped from the knife as the human flicked it aside, as if dismissing another nameless enemy. His movements were too clean. Too practiced. This wasn't just a man who had survived Corthus 5. This was someone who had thrived in it. Varkesh understood then. They weren't dealing with just any soldier. They were dealing with a ghost. A legend whispered in classified Dominion files. The remaining hunters backed away instinctively. For the first time in his life, Varkesh felt it. True, undeniable fear. One of his hunters stammered. What is he? The human took a step forward. Varkesh forced his voice to remain steady. Who are you? The human was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke. A single name. A title that shattered everything. Reaper. A cold wave of realization crashed over Varkesh. It couldn't be. Not him. Not the Reaper. The Dominion had long whispered about the ghosts of Earth. Humans who had walked battlefields alone. Men and women who had become something more than soldiers. Something the Dominion feared. The Reaper was the worst of them. A single operative. One man who had torn through entire battalions. A shadow that had never been caught. A weapon of the deadliest kind. Varkesh's pulse pounded in his ears. How had he ended up here? On Corthus 5? The Reaper's voice was quiet. Cold. You should have left me alone. Then he moved. The hunters fired. Plasma rounds tore through the air, scorching metal, punching into walls. But the Reaper was already gone. A figure in the darkness. A whisper of motion. A bullet shattered another visor. Another hunter dropped. 5 left. A blur of movement, a blade flashed, another gurgled scream. 4. Varkesh spun wildly, trying to track him. But the Reaper was everywhere. A rifle cracked. 3. A knife buried into a throat. 2. Then, silence. Varkesh turned. Only he and one other remained. Blood soaked the ruins. Bodies lay still. The Reaper stood across from him, his visor reflecting the dying embers of Corthus 5's wreckage. Varkesh's mouth went dry. The Reaper tilted his head slightly. You're the last one, aren't you? Varkesh ran. Not out of strategy. Not out of tactics. Out of fear. A cold, animalistic terror clawed at his mind. His feet pounded against the ground. His breath came in ragged gasps. He didn't care where he was going. He just needed to get away. Behind him, the Reaper didn't chase. Didn't rush. He just walked. Like death itself, patiently waiting. Varkesh's mind was screaming. He activated his emergency distress beacon. A final, desperate signal to anyone in orbit. Please. Help me. Then, ahead of him, a whisper of movement. Varkesh skidded to a stop. The Reaper was already there. Waiting. His rifle was slung over his shoulder. His knife was sheathed. And yet, Varkesh knew. He was already dead. The Reaper looked at him. Unblinking. Then, for the first time, he spoke without anger. Without hate. Just a cold, simple truth. Run. Varkesh staggered back. His legs moved before he even realized it. He turned and ran. Because he had no other choice. And behind him, the Reaper simply watched. A specter in the ruins. The last thing anyone would ever see. Varkesh ran. Not with strategy. Not with purpose. Just raw, animalistic terror. His claws scraped against the broken ground as he scrambled through the ruins, lungs burning. He didn't care where he was going, he just needed distance. Distance from him. From the Reaper. Behind him, there was no sound of pursuit. No hurried footsteps. No plasma fire. The human wasn't chasing. He didn't need to. Varkesh had hunted thousands across 100 worlds. He had felt the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of closing in on prey. Now, for the first time, he understood what it was like to be on the other side. To be prey. To be hunted. His emergency beacon still blinked on his wrist, a weak but persistent signal reaching for the Bloodfang in orbit. If they received it, if the ship was still intact, he had a chance. A small one. But it was all he had. The ruins blurred past him. Every broken structure, every piece of shattered metal felt like a set of watching eyes. His mind was screaming at him. The Reaper had let him go. Why? The human could have killed him easily. Could have finished what he started. But instead, he had stopped. Had told him to run. The thought clawed at him, twisting in his mind like a poisoned dagger. This wasn't mercy. No, this was something else. A message. His wrist beacon flickered. A reply. Varkesh. The comm officer's voice was distorted with static, but it was there. They were alive. Varkesh forced down his fear and gasped into the communicator. Exfiltration. Now. Now. A pause. Then. Drop ship incoming. ETA 60 seconds. 60 seconds. 60 seconds until safety. 60 seconds until he could leave this cursed planet behind. But deep down, he already knew. The Reaper had let him go. He had walked away. Not because he couldn't finish the hunt, but because he didn't need to. The wind howled through the ruins. Then, a sound cut through it. A voice. Soft. Cold. In his communicator. 60 seconds is a long time, Varkesh. Varkesh's blood turned to ice. The Reaper was inside his comms again. Did you really think I wouldn't hear that? A distant crack. A rifle shot. Varkesh's eyes widened in horror as his wrist beacon exploded. The shot had severed his lifeline. No. Static swallowed the last desperate transmission. His connection to the Bloodfang was gone. Cut off. And the Reaper's voice whispered into the dead silence. You don't leave until I say you do. Varkesh's vision blurred with panic. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. But it was. Every step he had taken had been guided. Every move predicted. The Reaper had been ahead of him this entire time. His beacon was gone. His signal lost. And the drop ship. He turned his eyes to the sky. For a moment, hope surged through him. A dark shape cut through the clouds, descending toward the ruins. The drop ship. His way out. It was almost here. Then, a streak of fire. A missile roared through the sky, slamming into the ship. The explosion shook the ruins. Flames engulfed the craft as it spiraled downward, a screaming wreck that crashed in a distant fireball. Varkesh fell to his knees. The Reaper had planned everything. He was never supposed to leave. Silence. Then, a soft crunch of footsteps behind him. He was here. Varkesh turned slowly. The Reaper stood just a few paces away, his rifle slung lazily across his back, his knife gleaming in the dying light. Calm. Unshaken. His helmet visor reflected Varkesh's horrified expression. The Reaper exhaled slowly, as if disappointed. You YVs never learn. Varkesh tried to speak. His throat was dry. Empty. The words wouldn't come. The Reaper continued. I let you run for a reason. Varkesh forced himself to his feet. Why? The Reaper tilted his head. Then, he raised his hand. And pointed. Not at Varkesh. At the sky. Varkesh followed the motion. His stomach dropped. A new light appeared in orbit. Not a drop ship. Not reinforcements. A YVZR war cruiser. The Bloodfang. They were coming. They had seen the wreckage, lost contact with him, and sent the full force of their weapons down to kill whatever had done this. Varkesh should have felt relief. But instead, the Reaper chuckled. You brought them here for me. Varkesh's blood turned cold. That was the plan. Not to kill just him. But to make the YVZR send more. And when they landed, when they deployed, he would do it again. The hunters had become the hunted. And the Reaper would not stop. Not now. Not ever. Varkesh realized the truth too late. This was never a game. This was never a hunt. This was a war. One he had just restarted. And the Reaper was already smiling. The last thing Varkesh saw was the knife. Then. Nothing.